Përshëndetje dhe mirë se erdhët në program. Korrupsioni është problemi kryesor për qytetarët në Maqedoninë e Veriut dhe këtë e thonë ata vetë. Shprehet në për sondazhe të ndryshme, por e thonë edhe organizata, sidomos dhe institucione të rëndësishme ndërkombëtare. Për korrupsionin dhe luftën ndaj këtij fenomeni ka folur në mënyrë direkte që kurse ka ardhur në shkup edhe ambasadorja e re e Shteteve të Bashkuara të Amerikës, zonja Ангела Агелер. Në një bashkëbisedim me qytetarët në Gostivar të organizuar nga organizata Democracy Lab, ajo adresoi disa nga çështjet jetike që ka të bëjnë me korrupsionin, por gjithashtu foli edhe për marrëdhëniet mes dy vendeve, si dhe çështjet, ose më mirë thënë se si administrata e Shteteve të Bashkuara të Amerikës e shikon Maqedoninë e Veriut. Gjithashtu foli edhe për situatën dhe çfarë impakti ka lufta në Ukrainë. Pas shkëputjes publicitare, ju do të mund të ndiqni bashkëbisedimin e zonjës ambasadores amerikane Ангела Агелер për televizionin Arsat. Na ndiqni. We are so pleased today that with us is the U.S. Ambassador to North Macedonia, a dear friend of this country. Maybe I can say a dear friend of mine as well, Madam Ангела Агелер. Thank you very much for being here. You are not a stranger to this country. After you return back, now as an ambassador, what are your impressions, what this country has done right and where we could have done better?
Well, let me start out by saying thank you, my dear friend Nazim. We go back a while, so it's really a great pleasure to be here. Some things have changed dramatically, and the most obvious, as we discussed earlier, is the fact that you changed your name. This was, I know, enormously difficult for the people and the leaders of this country. It was a difficult decision. It was in many ways an unpopular decision, and I've heard from people around the country that it was not something that was easy to convince people to do. But as a result of that, North Macedonia is the newest and I think an incredibly important member of NATO, which was one of the stated priorities of this country since its independence. So I see that. I see providing support and assistance and encouragement to the people of this country and their elected officials. That is a top priority, to move towards the European Union. Challenges remain and difficult choices remain that will have to take place to do that. And some of the challenges are things that I've discussed publicly, frequently since arriving here in November, and that's corruption. We all know that it exists. We all have experienced it in different forms. You certainly more than I as an American diplomat, but it's something that even in my hearing in Washington, D.C., when I mentioned it, the response that I got from the citizens of this country, regardless of which community, ethnic community you're a part of, was overwhelming. And clearly this is something that is of interest to people here. So that also remains a top priority for us at the U.S. Embassy. And then thirdly, and very importantly for me, is the fact that I would love, during my time here, to find programs and opportunities to create economic growth. I think the European Union, moving towards Europe, is an important aspect of that, but moving towards Europe and therefore growing this economy, creating more economic opportunities so that young people of this country don't feel that they have to leave in order to find a future. I believe that there is a future here that is rich, that offers the cultural wonders of this country, and that we want to do what we can to support people, young people especially, so they see themselves and see their future here. I think losing the young people of this country to migration to other countries is an enormous loss of resources. So we will do whatever we can. I will do personally whatever I can to support that as well.
Okay, you of course tackled the most important things, but okay, we cannot leave without addressing maybe the elephant in the room that everybody is talking about, and that is a publishing of a list of corrupted officials, which, as you also mentioned, is one of the priorities of the citizens of the country. So let me ask you directly, when and should there be a list of corrupted officials that are investigated by US government or US institutions?
Well, as I told your colleague on television yesterday, first of all, there's not just one list. So there's actually several. And because there's different branches of the US government that deal with corruption and that address corruption. So it isn't, and also it's not a single list that comes in with lots and lots of names on it, and then we're done. Because I think, as you all know, corruption is an ongoing issue here. It's not something that a list comes out and then it stops. So there is a continuous dialogue between the US Embassy, my team here, me, and officials in Washington, D.C., whether they're at the Treasury Department, whether they're at the State Department, whether it's in the Consular Bureau, where they're looking at visa sanctions, economic sanctions, whether it's the National Security Council, looking at some security type issues there. So there's a continuous process that looks at sanctions and appropriate sanctions for individuals depending on which sorts of American laws and norms they have run afoul of, which would make it so that the United States no longer wanted them to come to the United States or wanted to impose financial sanctions and these sorts of things. So it's an ongoing process. There's not a due date, and I expect that this will not be a one-time thing. Probably in the coming months we will see a name, maybe several names, but they will continue to come out in the coming months and the coming years, frankly, as those in Washington that deal with this do the investigations, look at the details, look at the information, and determine that certain individuals must have US sanctions imposed.
The officials here welcomed this initiative, let's say, or saying that this is the way how partners work and this is the way how US is helping our country. But should they be afraid? Because in our opinion, most of the officials here do not get punished. And a lot of people think that maybe this kind of lists or this kind of putting the names in the public will help create that important notion of accountability. So do you think that they should be afraid?
I think that if somebody has not done anything wrong, then they have nothing to be afraid of. I think that there are those that probably feel very uncomfortable right now. And that's okay, because if there is wrongdoing, if there has been corruption, then they should be called on it. And frankly, they should be called on it. You know, the United States does this with other countries as well, with countries all across the world. But they're also, I would suggest that rather than being uncomfortable, that officials in this country, your elected officials, should be looking very closely at the kinds of activities that they are engaged in and that those who work for them are engaged in, to ensure that they are addressing corruption, because it's on your behalf. And so I think ensuring that elected officials take responsibility and are accountable for themselves and their staff is critically important. I would suggest they perhaps should focus more on that than when the supposed list comes out.
And just one more question on this topic. For the first time, perhaps, the judiciary officials were mentioned. Up to a moment in this country, only politicians were viewed as corrupt, or at least named. Even in the future, US also has done in the future naming few politicians to be in the blacklist, the popularly called list. So how this part of the officials, which are part of the judiciary, view this initiative coming from US institutions?
Well, I'm not sure how they view it. Again, if somebody has done nothing wrong, then they have nothing to fear. But there is, I think we're all very clear that there are issues within the judiciary, and our sanctions list are not limited to one sector. In fact, sanctions are also imposed on business people who are found to be engaged in regular corrupt activities within their businesses or companies, and that's fairly common around the world as we look at those who, regardless of where the money is coming from, have illegal activities in terms of their business activities. So it's not limited to just elected officials. It's also judiciary. It's also prosecute across the rule of law sector, and then certainly in business as well. The United States imposes sanctions because it's in the best interests of the United States. Because as a sovereign nation, we're required to do that. We're required to determine that certain people should not be allowed into our country. All countries do that. But we have found that sanctions can be very effective in encouraging, whether it's officials, business people, whoever, in being more cautious than they might have been, because US sanctions are serious. They can have long-term ramifications. And it is my hope, it is our hope at the embassy and in Washington that these will encourage better behavior. That the threat of sanctions by themselves, let alone the actual list, will encourage elected officials, officials within ministries across this country, educators, health workers, will feel like, I need to do the right thing. I need to do my job with integrity. Because first of all, it's the right thing to do. And secondly, because if I don't, there will be consequences. So the hope is that sanctions introduce a very concrete sense of accountability and consequences again. And I hope that seeps into the awareness of communities around this country.
The question is, you have often spoken about difficult decisions that our political class should take, and do you or can you specify what do you mean by that and what kind of difficult decision they should take?
The difficult decision now is to make the necessary choice to move towards the European Union. And I know it's, again, difficult, but to pass the constitutional amendment, which I know is not necessarily popular, but it is what is necessary to move forward, to make that, to have members of Parliament vote to pass the constitutional amendment so that, frankly, the country can move forward with the discussions and the process for EU integration and accession. And I think that's critically important because that, in my view, strongly is where the successful future of this country lies. So again, I know that there are party considerations for the MPs. They have voters that they are responsible for. But I think to make the case that this is in the best interests of North Macedonia, this is in our best interest to move forward, and that's the difficult decision that I'm referring to. The other ones are then part of it, because frankly, as this country begins to move forward into the EU, you have to address things like judiciary. You have to address rule of law. You have to address corruption. And so that's also part of the process. And I think everything is linked. And I think, as I mentioned before, economic opportunity also derives from that. And so it's a challenge for now. I believe if the decision is made, that if your members of Parliament make that vote, then they can move forward.
How are you going to pursue, especially some political factors here, to do these courageous steps that you just mentioned in order this country to finalize European integration? This question is important because, as you mentioned, North Macedonia is a valuable country of NATO after it joined this institution. So since everybody regards US as a friend, how are you going to help to convince some political factors that we know who they are to support these constitutional changes?
Really, all I can do is what I'm doing here today with you, although I think you're probably not as difficult to convince as some of the people that I've spoken with. But all I can do is encourage the leaders with whom I talk, to encourage, first of all, to encourage the people that I meet with in this country to think about it, to think about the benefits, to think about how their lives would improve if they move towards the European Union, the kinds of financial benefits that would come from being part of the European Union. Statistically, and it's very clear, countries that are in the European Union, when they join, they do better economically. That's just the data. And North Macedonia could expect to improve its economic situation by joining the EU. So I can't make anybody do anything, nor would it be appropriate for me to try and do so. But I tell everybody that I meet with that this is important, and that it's not only important to do this, but it's important to put this country first and not individual agendas before the best interests of this country. And that's what I do. That's what I do every single day. And I'll continue to do that and hope that your elected officials do what I consider to be the best thing for the country.
So let's reverse the question. US has been proven as a steady, reliable and strong supporter of North Macedonia since its independence. But has North Macedonia been a reliable partner to United States?
It has. It has. And you know, as you know, Nazim, you know me pretty well. I'm a big fan. I believe in this country. I really do. I see opportunity here. I believe that this country, its citizens, have done the right thing before, and I believe they'll do it again. I really do. Maybe it'll take a different road than I expect, but I have great hopes. And I will say that, again, speaking of NATO, NATO's first ally, it's the 30th member, but what North Macedonia has done thus far as its newest member of NATO is extraordinary. This country is fourth in terms of NATO allies supplying assistance to Ukraine, lethal and non-lethal assistance to Ukraine. That's extraordinary. They haven't been a member for that long, and yet they are fully committed, they are fully engaged, they are very active in Brussels, they're raising the positive profile of your country with Europe and with the United States. And so I think that's fantastic. Are there ways that we could work together better? Absolutely. Would I love to see more US direct investment in this country? Absolutely. And there are challenges to that because of corruption, because of issues like this. And so are there ways that we can improve our relationship? Always. But let's work on those, and then let's move forward.
Let me ask you another question in this direction, because North Macedonia and the United States has started a strategic dialogue. In simple terms then, and since you mentioned that you can help a lot, or together the two countries can work a lot, what this means and how the North Macedonian citizens will benefit from it? From this strategic dialogue?
So the strategic dialogue, the first one took place last June, as you know, and it covered all sectors. It really, it covered democracy, rule of law, culture, education, assistance, agriculture, looking at ways in which we could cooperate, collaborate, work together across every sector of society. How the U.S. might help, certainly in the military, a very robust discussion with military, and how we can work together to improve these sectors, to strengthen these sectors. Because, look, at the end of the day, a strong and prosperous North Macedonia is in our best interests as the United States. Your success is success for us. And so we really do want to do everything in our power to bolster these areas. And I believe that by looking holistically at our cooperation and our assistance with this country, that we can make a difference really across the board in different sectors of the society.
So in this context, you mentioned also Ukraine, and this is my last question. And the entire democratic world has shown unprecedented unity to support Ukraine, but why is so important that Ukraine wins? And what does that mean for US, for Europe, and of course for North Macedonia?
Yeah. You know, as Secretary Blinken said recently, Russia's illegal, brutal, horrific invasion of Ukraine is not a conflict that's just between two countries. And it's not a conflict that is just between Russia and NATO. This has affected the entire world. You have felt it here economically. You felt it in your energy sector. So has literally the rest of the world. And we've seen it in supply chains. This horrific invasion has affected all of the world. And setting aside the fact that we once again have war in Europe, to really think about that after getting out of World War II, there was a sense that now we can move forward as a united Europe and we can make the whole region better for everyone. And now we're war in Europe. And so the support that North Macedonia has given has been critical. And I think it is because there are those supported by the people of this country who recognize that we cannot let this stand. This cannot continue. This is not only are the people of Ukraine who have died by the thousands, not only for their sakes, but for the sake of this continent, for the economic issues that it has brought and the challenges, but for all of these reasons that it's absolutely crucial that we all do everything we can to support Ukraine and to bring about an end to this.
So would there be more American presence, economically, politically, pressure? So as we can see, people love America.
You know, the thing is that American businesses will come where they can make money, like all businesses. If you can make a profit, you're going to come. I served most recently in Pakistan, and I used to hear from officials there that American companies don't come here because of the security situation. Oh, they'll come. If they can make money, they'll figure out the security situation. That's not the case here, but it is. What I mentioned earlier is, and that's corruption. There are American companies who have signed deals, large deals, and then have waited years to move forward on them because they either are not voted out of parliament or there's a partner that is in corrupt dealings with other companies here. That slows people from coming. And so if we can address some of those issues and move them through, then I think you would definitely see more American companies, because this country is located in a very, very, it's a great geographic spot for investment. There's enormous regional opportunity for North Macedonia. So it is very much my hope, and it is one of my priorities, to see more investment here. To your question about the different winds blowing, you are absolutely right. And I talked to, in the last 2 weeks, probably have talked to almost every single political leader of different parties in this country that I haven't been talking to regularly anyway. And I make the same case, as I said, I make the same plea, me too, of, you know, let's do this. And I will continue to do that. I can't affect this country. It's a sovereign nation. It is not my place to tell people what to do and to tell your officials what to do. But Nazim knows I'm pretty direct, and I'm pretty free with sharing my opinions, whether they are welcome or not, and I'll continue to do that.
So, Madam Ambassador, thank you very much for doing this conversation together. It was a pleasure as always, and now in a different setting, but I'm sure we're going to have more opportunity to do so. Faleminderit shumë për gjithë këtë bashkëbisedim, zonja ambasadore.